Welcome to Connection Artist, the podcast for building better relationships by design. Love and human connection are fundamental needs for all of us, but how do we cultivate lasting, emotionally healthy, fulfilling relationships with ourselves and others? I'm Luca, and I invite you to join me in meeting everyday people with diverse backgrounds and ages who all have one thing in common: a genuine passion for fostering meaningful connections. You'll hear their heartwarming stories and practical advice for building lasting marriages, lifelong friendships, and self-love. In this season 1, we sit down with 10 couples, learn how they met, and hear the secrets behind how they've built lasting marriages. Their insights will inspire and enlighten you. I also interview guests who found and maintained warm, lasting friendships for decades, and they're sharing how they did it. And lastly, we can't forget the importance of growing a loving relationship with ourselves, so we discuss building self-love and confidence. I've brought together a fantastic lineup of guests for you to meet who will share their unique stories and invaluable communication and relationship advice. Together, we're learning the secrets to building more meaningful, fulfilling relationships, one conversation at a time. I'm Luca, and I invite you to join me in becoming a connection artist. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing to you Nancy and Jimmy, he also goes by Jimmy. I met Nancy not long ago at a coffee shop. We randomly struck up a conversation, and she has been such a joy to get to know in the brief time that we have spent some time together sharing stories of life. And I learned that she and her husband have been married for 38 years, so I thought they'd be perfect to bring onto the podcast to share with you their insights on how they've made their relationship work for so long successfully. They're both still happily in love, and I cannot wait to get into their story. So welcome, Nancy and Jimmy.
Thank you. We're so excited to be here.
Wonderful. So let's start off with, tell me the story of how you both met.
I want him to tell it first because I usually tell it first, and I want to hear how he starts it.
So we both went to school that was connected, St. Thomas and St. Catherine's, and we met at a party after a choir concert. I had actually been out of school for a couple of years, and Nancy was a freshman. And as past president and knew a lot of people, went to the concert, went to a party afterwards, and recognized there was someone new that I didn't know from across the room. Cute, got my eyes and my attention, and I just kept hanging out talking to my friends. It's no surprise to you, Anna, that she came over and introduced herself.
Yes.
She said to this group of people sitting together, I know you and I know you, but I don't know you, pointing directly at me.
And really briefly, that's how Nancy and I met. She came up to me, and she started the conversation with me at a coffee shop, and then we just got to talking. But continue on. This is great. She's had this history of being very social, outgoing. All right, wonderful.
So she introduced herself to me, and I back to her, and then we just connected and chatted, and there was music playing. We danced and just kind of connected, and she noticed that I kept looking at her, and so she comes over and introduces herself. And as we're wrapping up, we go outside, and there were sparks. Things were going on, and we talk about it today as it was a kind of a love at first sight thing. Recognize there's something special about that person. Get out to her car, conclude our day. I don't know if I'm going to go into the...
I'll fill it in.
Okay. But anyway, just started that journey of being connected, not thinking at all that I've been out of college for 2 years. What am I doing?
Yeah.
Having a conversation with a college freshman. But none of those thoughts were in my head. It was really, this is a very unique, special person. Mm-hmm. We connected, and from that. So that's the night we met.
Did you know that she was a freshman?
I knew that she was, I think I knew that she was wrapping up her first year at some point in the evening.
Oh, okay.
Not, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, but it was, I grew up with 4 brothers and 4 sisters, and Nancy's younger than my youngest sister. And so conceptually, it was like, wait a minute, you're younger than my youngest sister. And
there's actually 6 years of age difference between us.
Okay.
So I was, of course, drawn to the older man. And so a few pieces of that story that I can fill in that I think make it a little interesting. I was a freshman who went to college wanting to have a boyfriend so badly. And I went to every party, like kind of like desperate, you know, and that doesn't usually tend to draw anybody to you. But the funny thing was I had actually been dating someone for a few months and literally broke up 2 weeks before this event and was broken up with. Let's put it that way. I was kind of heartbroken. I got jilted for a dance we were supposed to go to. I had invited 2 different people to go to that dance thinking I'm just going to go as friends. Neither one was willing to go with me. I mean, I was like at this low place relationally. And yet I came to this party with no sense of that looking for someone because it was a choir party. I would know everybody there. So I just went. I was just going to go have fun. It was my choir. And so that was really surprising to me to see people there that I didn't know. I didn't know these people were going to be invited. And literally every time I looked across the room, he was looking at me. Like, he was looking at me. Not in a creepy looking at me way.
Yeah.
It was like, that's interesting. So obviously then that did motivate me. But then the next step of this story was this was actually 41 years ago we met.
41 years ago.
And by the way, are you guys in your 50s or what's
Nope,
the age range?
We've entered the next decade after that.
So just for context, in the 60s. Okay,
Yeah, we're in our 60s.
They look very young.
So anyway, back then we exchanged phone numbers. Or no, we didn't even exchange phone numbers. I gave him my phone number.
Okay.
And it would not have been appropriate for me to call. Even though I could introduce myself, it would have been too much to call. So I then waited. This was a Sunday night that we met, and I'm thinking, he's going to call me the next day. He didn't call. He didn't call me on Monday. He didn't call me Tuesday. He didn't call me Wednesday. And I was freaking out. Like, what did I misread this? I thought he was, and it was really quite painful. He was just a busy working guy who had a lot of stuff going on in his life, but I didn't know that. I was simply obsessing over this person I had met and thought was, whoa, super cute.
So you, was there a reason why you waited to contact her? Because it sounds like you also were really interested in her at the beginning, love at first sight kind of an experience. Was it just that you were busy or?
That's a really good question. I don't have a specific answer as to why I didn't just call the next day, how you doing? I think I was out of school. I was working full time. I went back to work and a couple days went by and it was a different kind of time. She's counting minute by minute and I wasn't. I did call her on Thursday.
He did call me Thursday.
But it was, just a few days later. And to me, a few days working full time was not like, I've got to do something drastically different before I lose this one. That wasn't on my mind, but I definitely wanted to call her. I didn't think there was a level, this is my own mind, at 25 years old, that there was a level of urgency.
Yeah, and this is a good reminder for people who are dating is just because you might not hear from them initially for a couple of days, don't panic. It still might be a good connection. There might just be other things happening in their life that you're just not aware of. It might not be you. Basically, it wasn't you, Nancy. You weren't the reason why he wasn't reaching out. He still was interested. He just had some other things happening in his life that...
Right. And I didn't mean to cut you off. From communication standpoint, 2 things come to mind. One is this is a great thing to remember. We had a girlfriend of one of our sons used to work at the Apple store, and one of her favorite things was she loved their training. And one key training she used a lot was assume positive intent.
Yes.
And a really positive thing when you're having a communication is assume positive intent. Assume he's not being malicious or that there's no bad reason behind it.
Yes.
Exactly what you said. However, as a communication professional, I can also tell you a maxim is a communication abhors, ABHORS, abhors a vacuum. Communication can't stand a vacuum because what we do in an absence of information is we do have a tendency to fill it in. And our human tendency, that's thunder, by the way.
If you guys hear background noise, it's thunder happening outside.
My stomach is not rumbling that loud. But anyway, so we tend toward the negative.
Yes.
And so you can have both of those existing at the same time.
Yes.
I can assume positive, but it's also good for that other person to recognize, my lack of communication might be sending a message I don't mean to send.
Yeah, a very good point to keep in mind both spectrums. That be aware, even if you have something going on in your life, maybe you're really busy, be aware that they might be assuming something negative or he's lost interest in me. I will also also move on as well. Maybe I'll delete the number and forget about this. So it might serve you to just check in briefly and say, hey, I'll follow up with you in a few days, and properly plan a date or something, just to kind of get ahead of any worries that might be happening. If you truly are interested in the person, and there's also common courtesy too. It seems like most people within, even in a business sense, when you see an email or get a phone call, responding within 24 to 48 hours is just kind of a courtesy. So keep that in mind. But I just thought that was an interesting point that you guys highlighted, that the communication wasn't as immediate initially, the follow-up communication, but it still worked out to be a 38-year marriage. So there's still strong interest there despite the initial lag.
It did. And I can just put closure on our meeting story with just a little bit about what turned out to be our first date. You know, that was the day we met.
Now we're getting into the juicy details.
Yes.
But the very first date ended up being that very day he called me, Thursday, because he was coming to campus that night because his sister also went to the college, which I did not know her, but there was another concert. He and his parents were going to see her concert. As it turns out, I was ushering for that concert, and we made arrangements to meet afterwards. And so he came, I went, changed in my clothes, and then we went for a walk around campus, and we considered that our first date. And on this particular campus, there's this beautiful pond down the hill from this gorgeous chapel that almost looks like a cathedral. And there's a bridge over it's called the Dewdrop, but there's this footbridge. And so we were still very much in that, like, what is this? We'd look at each other. There was just this kind of electricity between us. We ended up on the footbridge. And I just said, this is so romantic. I said, it feels like we're in a musical. and I said, do you know the Music Man? And he's like, I do. And I actually had played Marian the Librarian in high school. And so I said, do you know this song? And I started to sing. There were bells on the hill, but I never heard them ringing. No, I never heard them at all till there was you. And,
very good.
And we basically sang the entire song, Till There Was You, to each other on our first date.
Oh my God.
And so it was, and then we...
Including the 8-bar kiss.
Okay, yes, including the 8-bar kiss. And so we jokingly, we didn't say it at the time, but we afterwards tell the story. It's like, if you do something like that on your first date, you have to get married just so you can keep telling the story.
That is so cute. That's so cute. And so how long did you guys date before you got engaged and married?
The long story short is that we dated that summer. By the end of the summer, we had broken up, and we got back together in December. Then I went to study abroad in Costa Rica for 6 months, where we exchanged letters. And when I got home from Costa Rica, the following summer, it was July of 1984, so 40 years ago, right now, once I got back, we've been together ever since. And then we got married in December of 1985.
Okay, so within
2.5 years, right? Did we date for 2.5 years or a year and a half?
Year and a half.
83, 85.
Okay, great. And then how did you each know that you were the one, that he was the one for you, that she was the one for you, like the long-term partner-wise?
When did you know?
Let's see. 2000 and... No, I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. Wow, you should have seen the reaction I just got.
We have to talk.
I had the sense of... So that December, when we got back together, there was clearly for me overcoming what am I doing with my life. And with this person, we had a short connection, and then she went out of the country for 6 months. And that was really affirming, confirming time in my life. Came back and started now thinking long-term relationship. It was really, for me, that was when the time was like, we're reconnected for a reason. There's something real here. And so we got into the end of that year, going through the holidays and really making plans. So I think it was, for me, seeing her again after she had been out of the country for 6 months. That July, August was really like locking it in for me. Mm-hmm. This is my life partner.
And what feelings did you have that led you to believe that this was your life partner?
The general caring for each other. I mean, she's cute, attractive, intelligent, spontaneous, creative, a great communicator. fun to be around, adventuresome. Wasn't going to be boring, and a smile that'll knock me over every time, still does. Aww. Gratefully.
So sweet. He dropped a funny little bit of a hint / blooper. It was after I got back from Costa Rica. We were going out pretty regularly, out to dinner or whatever. Yeah. And one time we were talking about the fact that he is actually older than my 2 older sisters. And he goes, "Oh, that's so funny. The oldest marries the youngest." And I'm like, "What did you say?"
We're having dinner. We're having conversation. Dinner. It just came out.
So it was like a Freudian slip. It was already in the back of your mind.
Yeah, I didn't think it was a slip. I think it was just, it was.
I think at that point I'm like, we haven't talked about that, and I wasn't resistant to the idea. It just kind of sideswiped me that he was already thinking about marriage. But and I can't tell you. I just knew when we got back together that I cared for him. It actually took a while for me to rebuild full trust because our breakup was all on him. Okay. And actually, it's kind of a communication chapter we're here to talk about communication. The way he broke up with me was pretty much to stop communicating.
Oh, one of those.
Yeah. And it pretty
Thank
much
you for
was
category.
He stopped.
I put myself in
if you're okay, he
Go
stopped
ahead.
calling.
Yeah.
He actually stood me up for a concert we were supposed to go to. I came up to the Twin Cities, and I forgot. Sorry. And that was after that we were non-communicado. So I came back to school that fall, and we were not communicating. He was just out of my life.
So he just ghosted you? No.
He 100%, ghosted me.
Before it was called ghosting. Or before there was a term for it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like, you just stopped communicating with her and just hoped that she would get the hint that you're no longer together.
And so sorry, I didn't mean to take it there.
No, but this happens in relationships. So
we're here today. I have no problem talking about my history.
And again, we always have this I always have this sidebar ironic story if I could share. We had the last date that we had before this happened was we went to a wedding together. And it was icy. He was pulling back. I knew something, and I didn't know how to draw him out. And he was having a rough summer, and I was a conflict avoider. Mm-hmm. And my communication skills were strong, but I didn't know how to communicate conflict. And I would rationalize and say, I really want to talk to him about this, but he's got so many things to worry about already. Mm-hmm. He has this job stress. He had an injury. He just had these things that were making his summer so terrible. He didn't need my problems on top of it. So consequently, we didn't address the elephant in the room. And his thing was to retreat, and mine was to kind of give him that space, but it was really hard. And so we went to this wedding, and it was not a very fun time together, but we're driving in the car, and this new song comes on the radio by Billy Joel, and he's like, making conversation, have you heard this new song? And he turns the radio up, and the song is Tell Her About It. Tell her about it. Tell her everything you feel. Give her every reason to accept it. I'm sitting here in my heart just screaming. It's like, yes, I'm listening to this new song. Are you? But even then, I couldn't bring it up. Yeah. It was just that silent irony that I was experiencing.
So initially in your relationship, it was challenging to have open and honest communication. You were kind of being overly considerate of him, and maybe even a little anxious. I
was afraid I would lose him if I brought up conflict.
Yeah, and
I actually did lose him by not bringing up conflict.
Interesting. So I understand too that I'm not saying that you were anxious at that time, but people also who have a more anxious tendency, if you know attachment styles, people who are in that attachment style category, they tend to be a little bit like that, where they're afraid to bring up conflict for the very thought of, I might lose them if we have an uncomfortable conversation, so it's better to just be quiet. But then, as you admitted, that can actually be the reason why you break up, because you're not talking about the essential things that need to be spoken about, the unresolved issues, the elephants in the room, things like that. So it's worthwhile having a conversation, even if it's scary.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good. So you knew he was the one. Just afterwards, what were some of the qualities or feelings that you had about him that you're like, yep, this one? He kind of knew earlier, it sounds like. He brought it up at the dinner. He let it slip that he was thinking about marriage.
Well, I was so young. I still had 2 years of college. So for me, even though I might want to marry him at some point, that it wasn't right, let's get going. Initially. I loved, he's very, very handsome. He has this amazing smile. He had a great ability to make me laugh. Good humor, playful. He was considerate, door opener, gentleman. Etiquette was there. It was just a lot. We had things in common. We loved music. We loved musicals. Some of those common things.
You guys could harmonize well, apparently.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wonderful.
And so I think it was just those things, and it was just growing closer, being away. He, like I said, once we're back together, it was just like, I came back and I just had no sense that we would ever not be together again.
Interesting. So it's like the heart grew fonder with the distance a little bit, kind of getting a taste of what life could be like without each other in it, and then realizing we're happier when we're together.
It did.
Especially, if you think about, if we go back to December when we had gotten back together and before she went to Costa Rica, said the big words.
Like
to each other,
love.
I love you, to each other, and then, I'm sorry, you're leaving the country for 6 months? But that was a different step. I mean, it's a different level of a relationship where you say those words and feel it and mean it, and then the distance, didn't change that. That was the unique thing about it, is it didn't change it, because we didn't wait to come back together and see how we felt. I said those words, and it was, meaningful.
Yeah.
To me.
And so, being together all these years, what is one key to your relationship success?
I would say everything good that has come out of our marriage and everything hard that we have worked through, because you can't be together that long without that, has been centered in our faith. It's our faith. We both share a faith in Jesus Christ. He has taught us. Our marriage strengthened a lot when we started to understand the importance of opening the Bible and reading it on our own, reading it together, letting God teach us the best relationship advice in the world, in our opinion, is in the Bible. And so the more we came to know that, the more we had a foundation to build discussions on, a foundation to come back to when we did hit struggles. And I would say, I feel without the shadow of a doubt, if we didn't have our faith, we wouldn't be together, because we definitely had some road bumps along the way.
Yeah. So it sounds like you relied on the Bible and your faith as a compass through those uncharted waters, those rocky times, aligning your morals and values along the same path together because you both share the same religious values. Is that right?
Yeah, and discovering, kind of getting the sense for both of us that the things that we're moving toward, we're now moving together, moving on the same road instead of your road and my road. We're on the same road, moving together, and we're learning and growing together and understanding how our relationship. We grew up in different religious faiths, structurally by different denominations, but it was growing in our. This is not how you grow up and how I grew up, it's how we're going to live our lives going forward. And when we got to that point and recognized we need to clean up or fill in the chasm of understanding, because it's about, I didn't marry your family, I married you. You didn't marry my family, you married me. And so we needed to figure out how we were going to live our lives together. And when we did that, that lined us up on the same path. So suddenly we're now common language, common thinking, working together to understand and correct each other, love each other through issues, and care about each other, because we were moving in a direction that we both strongly felt was the path we wanted in starting a family and being united in that front versus divided in that front and then trying to start a family.
So common goals you had, and setting those common goals, it sounds like, discussing those, and also really coming together as a union, as a partnership, versus sometimes we see relationships where one person's kind of like independent from the other. For you guys, it seems like, and in my observation, talking to others as well, when they come together as a true union, where they do things, they make decisions together, they align themselves together, that seems to work well for lasting relationships. But then there's also the concept of like interdependence, where I'm sure you both give each other freedoms as well, to be your own person, have your own hobbies, have your own social circles. So it's kind of that balance of finding interdependence and also just being a union and operating as a union as well in the marriage. Is that right? I don't know if that resonates with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is a mutuality, it's an interdependence, and it's a decision that we elevate the marriage. The marriage almost is an entity. It's almost a being. And when we prioritize the marriage because of its contribution to our family and, in our opinion, even society, then it just shapes our decisions and how we feel. And the other place where, for me, the faith aspect came in is when I learned over time to trust the changes I desired to see in him to God instead of me trying to get him to change.
Ooh.
That was a game changer for us. And for whatever reason, and I think this is pretty common, I had a lot more things that I wanted him to change than he had for me to change. You know, it's the stupid things, like where he puts his shoes, whatever it is. And we can, when you're not communicating well, those little things seem bigger than they are. Yeah. And I would get so frustrated, and I just got to the point where I was tired of feeling like I always wanted him to change something. And so I just started saying, God, first of all, change me, help me not think small like this, but, just change him. And in that process, I saw him make a decision very consciously to be what I call a man of the word. He made a decision years and years ago to start his day. He'd get up in the morning. You can ask him. He has read through the book of Proverbs every single month for 25 years, probably at least. At least 20, and so I just saw over time as he was doing that more, I would see these changes in his character and seeing God work on him, and then God was working on me too. So there's certain things that used to drive me crazy that he literally still does, and now I think they're just plain endearing. Nothing's changed except my attitude and his.
That's a good point.
It's pretty fascinating, and that's to me, that's what breaks my heart when people throw in the towel on marriage. When you hit those snags and when you start to let the petty things add up to be big things that they're really not. And then you lose sight of your first love. You lose sight of all that brought you together joyfully in the first place. And it's too hard. So I'm just going to end it. I'm going to trade it for an upgrade or whatever it is. And I understand there's times that divorce is a necessary thing. I'm not judging people who do it, but I see time and again, like, I think if they had just worked a little harder and had that communication, and there's just you miss out on getting to that joyful part. The best stuff always comes after the hard stuff. And if you quit in the hard stuff, you're never going to get the best stuff, and you're going to go to your next marriage and you're going to repeat the pattern and you're not going to get it. And I'm like, I spent so much time investing in training this guy. I do not want to start over. I'm like, no way. I am totally capitalizing on my investment here.
It's so funny.
Just saying.
So I wanted to pull out a few points from that. I love that you kind of touch on, recognize the difference between minor issues and major issues. I'm sure with the major issues, I'm just assuming that you did talk through those and bring those up, but at some point you realized I don't need to nitpick at him for minor issues. And then there really is power in your perspective. Whether your attitude is negative or positive toward your partner, you're going to get more of that from them as well, because your attitude, they say emotions are contagious. So if you view your partner negatively when he doesn't stack the dishwasher a certain way, and each time that you see that, you're like, oh, I don't like him right now, and that builds up, and then you start treating him a certain way that probably makes him react in a way that he's not as pleased with as well. So it kind of builds. But if you maybe give grace to people, or I don't know how you handle those minor things exactly if you bring them up, but maybe you can share how you've done that. But if you can change your mind frame on some of them, like some of the stuff that's just subjective, like where he places your shoes, for example, maybe that's a subjective thing where it's just like, maybe in that case, I just let him be him. And even though he's not placing in the exact area of the room that I'd prefer them, I'm just going to allow him to be himself right now and place them on the other side of the room where it's not causing any harm to anyone. So let that go. But how did you bring up the little minor things?
That's a great question. It really took time. And you still, I mean, there's times where I'll just still go like, okay, honey, the way the measuring cups are stacked in this drawer, it really works best if we do it this way. And I will, I still have those little things. But I feel like I really want to insert, I think it's a key communication aspect. We learned early on, I'd say within the first 10 years of our marriage, we had some mentors in our lives who really encouraged us to read marriage books, to read books about marriage. And we would read some of the same books on purpose and then talk about them. There were two in particular that really influenced us. One is The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman, and the other is Love and Respect by Emerson Eggerichs. And the whole concept of love and respect talks about basic male-female wiring, that women are designed to need love. It's like the air we breathe. We need unconditional love. Men, interestingly, are more wired for respect. The tricky part is everybody understands that concept of love. Like in the Bible, there's 3 kinds of love. There's the friendship-based love, which is, I think, phileo. There's eros love, which is romantic, erotic love. And there's agape, which is a God, unconditional, expansive love. And so we want that unconditional love from our spouse. And that's what we think makes a marriage thrive. But almost everybody naturally makes respect conditional. Like, I'd love to respect my husband, but how can I respect him when he when he does these things? He doesn't even know how to put his shoes in the right place. I'm just taking that petty example. And it was like so mind-bending to me to hear this concept. And Emerson, and we went to a conference on this, and the Emerson Eggerichs, the author himself, was doing the conference, and he said, if you picture each of us connected to an air hose, and that unconditional love is my female air hose, that unconditional respect is his, but when we don't get that unconditional love, it's like us standing on a hose, like a water hose, where you just stand it and it stops the flow of air or water. And I just came to this huge realization where I could think of how incredibly disrespectful I am to my husband by making this man who's a big picture vision kind of guy microscopically keep my house the way I want it to keep it, be tidy. And this was like one of my big aha moments. I would ask Jim to stop at the grocery store for me, and he'd pick up some. So he's worked all day. I'm home with some kids. I'm busy. I don't have time. I don't want to take my kids out, but I want him to take a detour on his way home to fill my need to my convenience. He stops. He picks up some things. I start taking him out of the bag, and I'm like, oh, and I'd be like, oh. Because I wanted one kind of soup and he picked up the other. I wanted cream of mushroom, he brought me cream of celery, or he doesn't know my brand of brown sugar. Whatever it is. And then I would like passively aggressively, oh, thanks, honey, but next time, and I would like just sort of demean him for not picking up. And I thought, okay, I want this man to be like this leader for me. I want him to go conquer, giants. I want him to take care of us financially. We were a single income family. But I make him feel like an idiot because he can't shop the way I want him to shop. How can I build up his respect, his belief that I truly respect him if I'm doing stuff like that? And so that was a big revelation for me. And so we started incorporating the language of love and respect in our marriage. And I started saying things like, honey, I don't tell you often enough how much I appreciate how hard you work for our family. I know it's not easy, even for you, to leave me here. I'm home with these 4 boys, and then you come home, and after your hard day at work, I just feel frustrated, and you just do it. You work hard, and then you help me around the house, and whatever it is, I give him behavioral examples, and I've literally started to see him like physically straighten up I could see a change in his demeanor when I started to let him know, no matter what we're going through, I respect you. And then he's amazing at making me feel loved. He always did better at that than I did respect. So for me, that this is a really circular answer to your question, but getting through that pettiness, the biggest way that I did it was to realize how disrespectful it was for my husband to be like, well, I can't respect you until you unload the dishwasher right, or unload it at all. That's they're separate things. And so it is learning to talk about those things. And so I don't know if you want to add to that.
I do. I just want to make a conversation or make a point about respect. Early on, it was like, hey, I'm the head of the house, or I'm doing these things or whatever, and you should respect me. And when I came to the conclusion that I can't demand any part of respect, I have to earn it all. And even though I wanted to be there, I needed to work to earn that. And even though I wanted, deep in my heart, I wanted to be respected by my wife, the most important person in my life, to look at me as knight in shining armor, someone who's fighting for a family, somebody who's doing those things, and recognizing that there are times when I'm the one creating opportunities to have that torn down. I'm not paying attention to it. And so I had to start to change my attitude as well about finding ways to follow through and do things differently, and not count on her to, look, honey, see what I did, and get that kind of acceptance, but to just keep striving. And I watched her heart change as I tried to remain consistent. That conference was important for both of us to understand the two elements of that, and also understanding between one of the lessons in this teaching was that there isn't a right and wrong between how men and women look at a situation. It's just different. And when you look at it, it's not you're right and I'm wrong, or I'm right and you're wrong. It's just we're just different because we're wired differently. But we're in a situation where we need to figure out how to work together. Yeah. We need to communicate, understand each other, understand ourselves, and that was a journey that we're still on. And that's the beautiful thing about it. We're still learning about each other. We're now empty nesters. But when she walks into the room, she knows that she has my eyes and my heart and takes my breath away still. Big deal.
Oh, are you getting a little emotional there, Jimmy?
Maybe.
A little bit.
Maybe. But that's a time of developing that, of caring about her and seeing how she's grown and how I've grown, and grateful to have this relationship that could have been derailed more than once.
So amazing to hear that. Like, as you just mentioned, there's so many little parts that could have derailed your relationship from the beginning. The kind of like the small little delay in communication, or following up after first meeting each other, or how he keeps the house tidy versus how you prefer it to be tidy, things like that. There's so many opportunities, like you mentioned earlier. There's so many places or small reasons why some people might just think, oh, I'm just going to throw in the towel. This is too hard. But you're proving that when it comes to the little minor stuff, if you can find a way to work with each other on the minor things, you get a really beautiful relationship and life experience out of it. I just have the belief that relationships aren't necessarily easy. It takes hard work to make them easy.
Yep.
So that was an observation that I had from just thinking about life, thinking about people, thinking about conversations that I've had with couples, is that there's a common theme that they all had to put in work. Like, it feels easier and it feels like it's in a good groove later on. And there were, seasons where it was easy at the beginning and sometimes harder, but all of them had to put in work for it. Yeah, that's good. And by the way, when we were at the coffee shop, you mentioned something about a communication ritual that you guys do. I don't know if it's weekly or daily, but you guys do some kind of a journal or something?
Yeah. Actually, it's so funny you should bring it up, because we literally just finished it. This isn't something we've done for years or anything, but beginning of 2023, we decided that we wanted to start our day. We each have a very individual morning routine that involves Bible reading and prayer, time with God. He has his quiet time, I have my quiet time. And we've just felt this longing for being more together. We're, as Jim said earlier, we're empty nesters. We have more ability. We have more freedom in our jobs right now and things like that. And so we said, why don't we pick a marriage devotional, a marriage book or whatever? And we went to the bookstore together it was New Year's Day of 2023. And we chose a book. It's by Tim and Kathy Keller. Tim Keller passed away this past year, but he is a well-known preacher from a big church in New York. And he's written tons of books of theology and life. But they wrote a book called Meaning of Marriage. And It was about marriage from a biblical perspective. And then they had a companion 365-day devotional. And so we bought the book and the devotional, and we just decided that we would start the day. We'd read their devotional, and we would just talk about it. It would spark questions. It talks about everything from sex in marriage to communication to the difference between the world's cultural view of marriage and the Christian view of marriage, why it's different, what God's view of marriage is, and just and right out of the starting gate, it would just spark these great discussions, kind of like this particular podcast, where we think we're only going to go here, but we go here, 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 and here, and we look at the clock and go, this is a great talk. We got to get going with our day. Now, did we do it every single day? No, we can tell you we didn't, because we started January 1st, 2023, and we just finished December 31st, July of 2024. So it took us about a year and a half to do a 1 year devotional.
When I would travel or we'd be out
of
town, that we wouldn't do it. We wouldn't try to do it remotely. We would just pick it up when I was back in town.
But that's interesting that even after 38 years, you're still working to improve and develop your relationship. It doesn't stop. It's a continuous pouring of energy, of love, of communication, and it sounds like a really great excuse for you guys to have meaningful connection and communication about topics that better each other's lives and the relationship as a whole. And it was just, whether it's this exercise or something else you might have chosen, it sounds like it's really benefiting your relationship to remain connected, strongly connected to one another, and continue learning about each other and showing curiosity about each other's perspectives and such through the power of communication, daily communication.
Well, plus remembering this journey has given us the opportunity to remember experiences when we were first married, before kids, and when we had kids, and how we approached a particular topic on the day we read it for that devotional. We'd talk about, or do you remember when? Oh, I don't remember that. And then she'd say something, oh, that's right. And then I'd say something, she goes, oh, that's right. And we kind of helped us remember the journey we've been on by looking back and communicating and telling stories that I had forgotten or she had forgotten, and we're sharing together because it was a common experience, some things we remember. So that was a fun part of the journey in this past year and a half of going through this devotional, is we also got to experience a look back and see where we are, understand where we're going, but see, by talking and telling about those stories, we also got a chance to review the amazing journey we've been on.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a combination of challenge and celebration. So we would get some days where there will be, a pointed question, but, about this element of marriage, and it would kind of, they're certainly addressing couples that not everybody's probably in the good position we are as they go through a book like this. And there's probably a lot of women who are reading this wishing they could read it with their husbands, or men reading this wishing they could read it with their wives. But it said it'll ask these pointed questions like, well, in your marriage, where does this play out and where do you need to work? And some days will be like, well, I know I'm still working on this, and he would go, yeah, me too, or whatever. And then there's some days where it asks that pointed question, and I'll look at him and like, we got this already, don't we? They're like, yeah. So
it sounds like both of you keep a mind open to personal self-development.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's like a key for you both. And I've seen that too with the other couples that I've interviewed too, is that they're both still curious about bettering themselves and bettering their relationship together. It's not just one person expecting the other to do all the work on themselves to, no, I'm perfect, it's you. If we have an issue, it's your issue, you fix yourself. I'm staying static as I am. It's not that kind of an attitude. Both people together are realizing we're not perfect humans, and we're still evolving even still. So two people that are curious to better their lives and better their lives together can have an outcome like this, where you successfully stay together for decades.
Absolutely. And we want to give, well, first of all, credit to God and thank him, because it is a gift, we believe. But we both come from longevity in marriage as well. His parents were married for how many years before almost 59 years before his dad passed. My parents were married 66 years.
Oh, wow.
After, when my dad passed. And in fact, our parents were married. They didn't know each other, but they were married 1 month apart. So they were both married in 1954. And my parents,
wow.
They would have celebrated their 70th anniversaries this year, but they didn't make it that long. But so we had that example as well of that longevity, that love for a lifetime. And that's it's actually a big motivator for us, because we know what a gift it was for us.
Totally.
And we want our kids to be able to say, when everybody says, well, people just don't stay together these days, and our kids can say, well, my parents did. And they can see that that's possible.
And that's part of why I'm doing this podcast, is to introduce these stories of long-lasting role models in relationships and marriage, because not everyone has the background where they come from a family that has had a two-parent household, or has been able to see what does a healthy relationship look like, even when it is a two-parent household. How do you successfully work through things together? So, depending on the household, they may have seen poor examples of conflict resolution or things like that. So just introducing people to, hey, these people who are successfully and happily still married, these are some of their tips for all of us to learn from. And whether you apply this to your marriage or your dating life, or even just your relationships in general with friends and colleagues, work colleagues and such, like, these are all valuable communication tips that you can transfer to any form of relationship that you have in your life. So it's really a gift that you're giving all of us by sharing your story. So this brings me to our last question, and that's, tell us about a time where you both had to overcome a challenge together using communication skills. Something that tested you.
We talked about this a little bit, and I guess, I think we're given our stories, and even the hard parts of our stories to admit, I believe they can be perhaps the greatest help. So this is a bit of a painful moment that we had pretty early in our marriage. It would have been 4 years in. 4 years. 4 years in. And the long story short is, I started a new job just over 4 years after we got married. My very first week on the job was an out-of-town training. I and a female colleague of mine were sent to be trained to be trainers, basically. There were other people from the organization there. There was a gentleman there who paid me a great deal of attention. And don't get me wrong, we're out of town at a hotel. It did not turn into an affair in the classic sense, but there was an emotional connection with this person that I opened my heart to, and had far deeper conversations, far later into the night conversations with this person. And this person actually also lived in the Twin Cities, and very openly told me he wanted to pursue this potential of an extramarital relationship.
And he was in a relationship too?
He was married also.
Okay.
And there was just like this connection, and we're 4 years in, and I would say we were kind of flatlining. There were elements of, in our relationship with Jim, that the initial spark was dimming a little bit. Jim was really into his hobbies. You talked about that, independent, interdependent. He spent time, playing softball, going golfing. He was very kind of single-minded about sports. And we'd literally be in the car together and not be talking. And I just would have this fear oh my gosh, we've run out of things to say. My parents never ran out of things to say. And I'm I don't know, we're not talking. Oh my gosh, what's, and he hadn't paid a lot of attention to me in the whatever that light, the light that he sees now when I walk in the room. At that stage, I didn't feel that when I walked in the room, and I don't think he showed that. So then this man starts speaking, whatever. Long story short, which I said it was going to, I can't say it's long story short. I'm making it long here.
It's okay.
But this was to me a God thing. My friend who I was traveling with saw what was going on, and when we were on the airplane on the way home, she said what was going on. She challenged me. She was a friend, and she said, I said, I don't know. I have these feelings. I'm confused. I feel like it was wrong. We didn't do anything, but I still feel like that what I did was wrong. And she said, you need to go home and tell Jim. And I was like, ooh, that doesn't sound like something I want to do. And she's like, you need to tell Jim, because things that stay secret are in the dark. And things in the dark tend to multiply because, one little lie or, you just kind of build deception upon deception. And I knew in my heart she was right. And I came home and, so you'd think you'd be excited your first week on the job. And I'm like, I got to tell you something. And it was a really hard conversation because I had to not only say I had this kind of flirtatious attraction to this person, but I had to say the things I wasn't willing to say that very first summer, the things that I wasn't getting, that he wasn't doing. I had to finally say, I'm not having my needs met in this relationship. And I remember we cried, and it was a huge turning point. You can share what that was from your perspective. It was not a fun conversation.
Yeah.
No, it was very difficult to hear that she was thinking about what happened, and I'm grateful that she had said that to me, but then talking about what do I want? Or is this a crossroads? It felt like a real crossroads, and had to decide. I remember standing in the kitchen just weeping, going, I don't want this to be over. I don't want this to be here. And what are we kind of understanding, what are we going to do about it? And it was we, and we was me having to say, okay, well then am I all in on this relationship, or am I just part way in? Am I still trying to keep my independence while I'm claiming to be married? What's that all about? And it was challenging on so many levels, but it was a heartbreaking thing to me that she was thinking maybe there's more to life than with me. Hard to hear those words. And it began the journey of talking about it, confessing that's not what I want.
You didn't want to break up, or you didn't want it to get divorced, is what you're
I didn't in my heart want to, but I didn't want it to be as hard as it felt it was either.
Right.
I didn't want it to go on if that was what it was going to feel like, because it felt like it was kind of flatlining, and that was hard to picture. I actually have kind of from in that time frame, I'd love to say that moment fixed it once and for all. I think there were a few more times where I was still, feeling unmet needs, didn't know how to communicate what I wanted or what I wasn't getting, and in my expectations of marriage. But at one point I found a journal entry that I wrote where I was almost super immature about it. And that's the thing we remember, depending on when you get, we bring our immaturity. Sometimes their prefrontal cortex hasn't even closed yet,
Right.
And I'm just like, well, I've been thinking about getting divorced, but I think it would just hurt my dad so much because my sister had gotten divorced and my dad was just devastated because we loved my, whatever. And I'm like, don't get divorced because of my dad. We didn't have kids yet or anything. And it just was, like I said, I just see my own immaturity as a huge part of that. And like I said, for me, God placed that person who said, go tell. Had I kept that in the dark and I had pursued it, I could see him just very easily just slipped into like, I think I'm done.
And maybe I can imagine that maybe that created some accountability for you next time that you had to, I don't know, beyond that one training week, if you had to see that person again. Yes, no? The person that you were kind of interested in.
Interestingly enough, our paths did not cross in our company. There was, we actually had set up a meeting, like literally to decide this. I mean, it got so serious that he was waiting for an answer from me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was, and I gave the courtesy of the meeting, and I met with him, and I said, the answer is no, and this is wrong, and I'm not doing this in my marriage, and you shouldn't either.
Yeah.
So, but like I said, but I've learned. I've been very close, even in knowledge of situations where actually infidelity did happen, and the marriage stayed. And that's what people don't even know. We're so like, even Christians will go, infidelity is the only acceptable reason for divorce, but there's nothing that says because of infidelity you must get divorced. And so a lot of times people's like, he or she was unfaithful. That's it. I'm done. I'm like, okay, you've been married for 15 years and there was one slip and that's it. You won't fight to come back together and fight to make it work and stand for your family and stand for your marriage. And so I'm just grateful that that was nipped in the bud. I'm grateful that it just was the spark of a really difficult but essential conversation. And that was a grace to us. But I'd like to think that everybody, if you really, truly love that person, don't just let them go because of a stupid mistake. If they're willing to fight. And I have a friend I know who recently had that, discovered devastating news about her husband, and she felt very called to fight for her marriage. And it's beautiful to see what has happened for them in coming back together and now deciding this is what we stand for our family. And I just want people to stop listening to what world says. It's like, yep, they cheated on you, throw the slug away. And it's just awful because of the ripple effects that it has on the family and relationships.
Did it make it easier once you did confess that? I'm sure it was a very difficult, obviously, as you said, a very difficult conversation for you to confess to him initially when you came back from that trip, letting him know. Embarrassing, challenging, vulnerable to talk about that and to talk about these private thoughts that you've had about someone else. I'm sure that was really awkward. But did it make it easier for you later on to express your needs and talk about your other needs as the relationship progressed, because you got over that first really uncomfortable conversation, saw how awkward it was, but then maybe it gave you the motivation to, okay, that didn't end anything, we're still going, now I can feel a little safer continuing to express my needs as they come up. Did you feel that?
Yes and no.
Okay.
And that's just part of my own pattern. I've noticed my own pattern over the years is oftentimes I have the ability to see all sides. I'm a good communicator in a way because I can see all sides of it. Like, I can be talking to someone who I completely disagree with, but I can understand why they think or believe that. And I can respect that. And so when I'm in a conflict with somebody, I can sort of rationalize and say, well, I get why that's happening. Or I see that they're burdened. I see why they're doing it. They've got this pressure and that pressure and this pressure.
You're empathetic.
And very empathetic. And so then I have to hold myself enough esteem to say, I'm not like one more problem to them. I'm the love of his life. I have a right to bring my one more thing on top of his other things. And he gets to be the grown up to learn how to deal with that. But when we in our relationships don't bring up those heart issues with each other, we deny that partner the ability to make it right. And so, like I said, I had the example right out of the starting gate. Don't say something and see it disappear. And that happens all the time.
Yeah.
But say something, go through the painful act of working through it, see the magic that happens when now you come together stronger because you've dealt with something together.
And it wasn't a light switch either, just so you know, that when that conversation happened, when we would talk about things, she was more open to talk about things, and so was I. But I also my ears were wide open to hear what was concerning for her and what was those issues. I wanted to know, because if I was causing her to be looking elsewhere, I needed to figure out what was I not doing? Was I not paying attention to? And this was also a time in my life where I still hadn't given my life to the Lord fully. It was pre that time frame, and so I was just carrying my upbringing and my, 4 brothers, 4 sisters, a lot of other people telling me what to do, and kind of stiff-arming. I want to be my own person, and kind of I had that individualism mentality still woven into my lifestyle and the way I communicated, and so it was a beginning of learning to communicate with each other, learning to do some of those things. It wasn't just, oh, okay, now we're good. That was we still had work to do. And gratefully, as we've talked about earlier, we're continuing to work on it. But it was
never done.
It was a few years of trying to figure out. Now, I still don't do everything perfectly, nor does she, but none of us are called to do that. We're called to work together on it, to talk it out, to talk through it, to develop a deeper understanding of one another, so that if I can understand your perspective, then I can respond in an appropriate way versus just dismiss you or demand from you. That's not what a communication relationship is about.
Yeah.
It's about open communication, and it took some time to get there.
Yeah, and I think that there's also, I think it's probably common for a lot of couples to cheat or look elsewhere in a marriage because they feel like at their foundation they're not getting their basic needs met. But then think to yourself, have I expressed my needs? Have I given the partner the chance to work on these?
Exactly.
Or am I holding them in and just being resentful because this person isn't doing A, B, and C, and therefore, I am going to look elsewhere to meet those needs. But did you give your partner a fair chance? Because it sounds like that was a light switch for you, is when she let you know, she shined a spotlight on, these are the areas of opportunities that I need us to work on right now. And so you were more alert and aware and considerate of those things. And hey, this is something that I need to start paying attention to. Mm-hmm. It was beyond my view before. I didn't know how she felt about those things. But the power of expressing your needs is so uncomfortable for so many people. But also it pays off, because then both people together, if they do love each other and they do want it to work, it gives both of them a fair chance to work on it together to meet those needs.
We're not mind readers. And I know so often I literally hear people say it, and maybe has come out of my mouth before. You should know by now.
Yes. You
should know by now, whatever it is. Well, clearly by their behavior, they don't know by now. And I don't have to demean or belittle. I need to say, you know what, I'm really discovering this particular thing is super important to me. And I would love for you still to be willing to work on that with me. Mm. And that's where you open doors, instead of saying, look, you should know, you should have known. And it's like, well, they didn't. Assume positive intent, going back to what we talked about at the very beginning. Assume positive intent. Assume they didn't wake up that morning saying, what can I do to really piss my wife off? Nobody does that. And I think few people do that. I mean, I know there are people, whatever. Let's just assume healthy, basic, emotional and mental health here. But it's the grace. It's the grace and space to continually change. And this kind of goes back. I wanted to say this when you were talking about that commitment to personal development. Like one person might stay static while other grows, but I think it's even more that we grow at different pace. I always have this picture of, you start out, you at the end of your marriage vows, you are walking side by side down the aisle. That is probably the only time in your marriage you are going to be in the exact same place at the same time. Because it's going to start right from there, that something in her, she's maturing and developing, and she's like pushing ahead in terms of mental or social or spiritual development. And then he's behind, either going, wait, who are you now? Or wait, don't leave me. Or she's now looking back and saying, well, you immature person, I've grown here. And then next thing you know, he decides, and suddenly he shoots ahead of her. And if you aren't confident and comfortable in yourself, you feel threatened by the growth of the other. Ooh. But if you say that, again, this is our marriage, and it's, picture yourselves like connected by a rubber band. There's going to be times it's going to be stretched, but then it pulls and you might go ahead. But as long as there's at least that tension, you're still connected. That's what's good. And every once in a while, you get to that amazing sweet spot where you're kind of back in lockstep again. And that's just where you go like, oh, this is so awesome. And then you're like, oh, wait, it's hard again. It's like, no, it's okay. It's just all part of it.
That's so good to remember. Any parting words of advice, like one word of advice that you'd have for anyone currently in a relationship or seeking to build a long-lasting relationship, whether you're dating or newly married, or maybe you're just going through a rut right now in your marriage? Any relationship advice that both of you would each offer listeners?
I would say make sure that you ask questions and listen to understand. Don't think about how quickly I can defend myself or respond. Ask a question of your significant other and listen to understand. Because when you understand them, you get closer to a better level of communication, and so your response is appropriate to what it is they're actually asking you. And it's okay when you're struggling to continue to ask follow-up questions, ask probing questions. Don't just assume your initial response is the only response that qualifies. You're in communication. So ask questions, and ask enough questions, and take the time to listen to understand, and you'll get closer to your significant other.
Actively listen.
Yeah.
Got it.
That's good. I think this might sound really similar. I'm just going to use slightly different language. When you are tempted to be critical or condemning of the behavior of your partner, get curious instead.
Ooh.
Choose curiosity. I wonder what's going on that would have caused them to do this thing, which feels so obviously hurtful to me. Mm-hmm. Or I wonder what's going on that they did this again when I've asked them 10 times or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And come out and maybe even add, I love the alliteration of this, compassionate curiosity. Remember that this person is first and foremost your life partner. They're not some dude. It's not some gal. It's your life partner. And give them the respect to say, hey, I'm curious about something and I just want to bring it up because I don't want it to be sticky between us. And here's what I experienced when you said this, did this, whatever. I'm curious, was there something going on that I can support you in? Or it's really important to me. And if it's not important to you, I want to understand better why. And maybe I need to adjust my expectations. There's just so many ways that conversation can go when you lead with compassionate curiosity.
Those are such good examples of like how to raise curiosities without making the other person feel attacked. I think that's why some people hesitate to raise questions, maybe from a history of, hey, when I've posed questions, they felt blamed or attacked, but the way you pose it really makes a difference. Like you can still ask questions, but just be thoughtful in your approach. And you just gave some really beautiful examples of how to approach with kind of like an open curiosity, a compassionate curiosity, as you said, to make it seem like you're just inviting a conversation. You're not trying to blame or anything like that. Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much. This has been such a pleasure getting to know both of your backstories. Yeah. The advice that you've shared is so meaningful and impactful. I'm sure a lot of people will take a lot of nuggets to apply to their own life. So I just want to thank you on behalf of our listening audience for being so open and vulnerable with your backgrounds and your stories, and for being guests on this podcast. Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Anna. This was really fun.
As we wrap up another episode of Connection Artist, I want to express my gratitude to you for listening and exploring how we can all grow and better connect with one another. I created this podcast to support your relationship success and happiness. If you found value in this episode, here's how you can support me and help spread the word about this podcast. First, subscribe to this podcast and share it with 10 friends. If you share this education with 10 people and they share it with 10 people and so on, we can grow this movement of creating a more loving and caring world. If you'd like to show your support on a personal level, visit www.analuca.com. That's ANALUCA. Explore my heart-centric products and education, from poetry books to online courses, art prints to apparel. Every purchase directly enables me to continue producing episodes and sharing these valuable stories and insights with you, because this podcast is not free to create. Please consider buying something I've made with my heart and soul to connect with you. Discover handmade heart-shaped art prints and hoodies featuring my exclusive Crypto Love Drops collection at www.artbyanaluca.com. Read about the inspiration behind these beautiful heart artworks at cryptolovedrops.com. These make really great, unique gifts for your friends, family, and spouse, and serve as a lasting symbolic reminder of your love for them. Or if you enjoy journaling or you'd like to start, get my 15-minute daily guided journal for confident mindset titled Yes, I Can. If you want more stories, buy my poetry book, The People We Meet, available on Amazon or directly on my website, artbyanaluca.com. Just click on the Books tab. Listen to my music album called Reprise on Spotify. Fun fact, the opening music track that you heard on this podcast is actually composed by me and is featured in my music album. Also, don't forget to check out my hand-illustrated apparel line at www.laughstoself.com. I hand-designed really funny, cute illustrations that made me laugh, but also serve the purpose of spreading humor, love, and connection with others. That apparel line of hoodies, t-shirts, and sweaters are exclusively available only on my website, so if you want to wear something unique, check out laughstoself.com. Connect with me on social media for podcast and life updates. You can follow me on Instagram or TikTok at Luca Official. And lastly, if you're based in the United States and would like to be interviewed on the podcast, send me a message at myconnectionartist@gmail.com to potentially join me as a guest on this show in the future. Remember to subscribe to this podcast and leave a 5-star review. It helps a lot in reaching more listeners like you who can benefit from this information. Thank you for being a part of this Connection Artist community. I'm wishing you so much love and happiness in your relationships. Stay tuned for the next episode.